Alright, in this video we're going to be talking about how to connect a flight controller to a speed controller. Oh man, it's a super difficult problem, right? No, well you should just plug this end into here and then that end into there and it should work, right? Right? Well, I found that sometimes it's very easy where you just, take your cable that comes with either the speed controller or the flight controller and just plug them in and it works. I've also found that sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. So I figured I would go ahead and make a quick video just rolling through some of the differences and intricacies of using all-in-one flight controller and speed controller and getting them all to work. So the first scenario is with this 6 amp all-in-one speed controller and this flight controller. So let's not look at these cables and let's just look at this cable. If you are a very observant person, you'll notice that there's no red wire. So how are we supposed to power the flight controller? Now, some of them do come with a red wire, and that's really the fancy thing that makes everything work properly. If it doesn't come with, and usually, well, I guess I'll take a step back, most flight controllers do come with a red wire to plug in. Some speed controllers do not. This one in particular did not have a red wire. And I'll explain why. There is not a 5-volt voltage regulator on this speed controller. So it's basically the manufacturer is saying, hey, we don't have a way of regulating voltage from the battery through the harness to the flight controller. So if we did provide that red wire, it would just be dumping the full battery voltage. And if your flight controller can't handle the full battery voltage, like if it's a 2, 3, 4S battery plugged into this speed controller, it'll burn out your flight controller. So whenever they don't have a red wire with the ESC, take note that that is to prevent getting too much voltage to the flight controller through this little harness. Now, that is something where, like if you look over here, this is a scenario where I had this this speed controller did not have a red cable in the harness. And so what I did, if you can look carefully here, I just tacked on a little jumper. It goes from positive, and then I just soldered this cable onto the positive of the flight controller, and that gave me the voltage I needed. Now, again, that's giving you the battery voltage. That's not a regulated line, but on most flight controllers, they've got a battery in, and that jumps it down. There's a regulator on this board that'll jump it down to 5 volts, and it'll run everything fine. What you don't want to do is on a 2, 3S, whatever build, dump that voltage straight into this header pin, because I don't think this is regulated. It's supposed to accept only 5 volts. So I'm belaboring the point, but hopefully you understand that if there's not a red line in the speed controller cable, then you can do a jumper to the battery terminal on the flight controller, and that's fine. That'll work. But do not try to make your own special or use the cable that goes, from here that came with the flight controller. Ignore the harness that came with the speed controller. Plug that guy in, because you might burn up your flight controller. So just be cautious of that. Okay, so that is this scenario. So we'll get that out of here. Okay, now we're looking at a couple other scenarios. Let's just hypothetically say that we have a flight controller and we want to make, just hypothetically build a 3-inch quad. Okay. And let's just, if we were to run that hypothetical scenario, let's say that speed controller that is on the 3-inch quad doesn't have any type of designation as far as pinout on the header, and neither does the flight controller. And we come back to, this is the harness that came with the flight controller, and this is the crazy freaking harness that came with the speed controller. And if you look carefully, let's play a little bit of who can spot the difference. You should be able to quickly notice that the positive and the negative are on opposite sides. That's not good. So who do we believe? What do we use? Are these even compatible? Can we plug this in and it works fine? I would submit to you not just to plug stuff in to see how it works, because that's usually when you release the magic smoke. A really good way, if you're not sure, if you're confused with what cables go where, because not knowing where ground and positive go is kind of a big deal. If you mix up the motor signal wires, you're not going to burn anything up. You just might say motor 1 is now motor 3 or motor 4 or something. It's not that big of a deal. You can reconfigure that and be hella sweet. So let's pull up our handy dandy voltmeter. Okay, we'll go over to continuity mode. You don't need to see that. All you need to do is have ears to hear that. So whenever there's a short, it beeps. Okay, this is a super handy tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the camera so that you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. So we'll come down to here. Okay. Now we'll take this flight controller, and what we can do with this continuity mode is we can go to battery ground. See, there's a B negative right there. So we're going to put our little probe on that, and then we've got another ground pad over here. And if these two pads are connected, it shorts and beeps. Okay, so this is a tool that we can use to make sure that wires are going the direction or going to where we want them to. So if we look here, there is what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pads. So if we trust this one, this cable, ground is on this far corner right here. If we trust this cable, ground is over here. Let's try to see if ground is over here. It's not beeping. Let's see if ground's over here. It's beeping. So that tells me that this flight controller has ground first, and then usually the convention is ground, 5 volts, and then the 4 signals to your speed controllers. So, and we can do the same thing over here and easily tell, okay, is ground on the same pin? And if ground is on the same pin, then we know that we can work the convention for all these all-in-one flight controllers and speed controllers, that it goes ground, 5 volt, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 for your motor signals. Okay, so once we figured out that, okay, yeah, everything is working, or everything is the way it should be with ground being on the far left side, now let's just look at these cables and see, okay, well, what do we do now? I'm going to go ahead and move the camera back up just a tad. So if we plug this in, we've got ground on the bottom, okay, cool, and we've got 5 volts, and then we've got our signal wires, but look, the signal wires are all twisted, so they're not in the same plugs. They're not running, so we've got green on the top here, then green is over here. So what's going on there? Well, like I said earlier, that's not a deal breaker. What you want to make sure is that when you plug in, that you've got ground and 5 volts situated. Also, let's say that we did want to use this cable for length reasons or whatever, and we know that ground was over there. As long as all of the cables run to the same port on the other side, the color doesn't matter. So I can plug this one in, even though we just tested and I showed that ground was here. Now we're running through a green cable, but if I check over here and the ground is also on this pin here, I can plug this in, it'll work fine, because we'll do ground through green, 5 volts through this gray, and then our other 4 PWM channel, or our other S-bus channels, or I'm misspeaking, our other speed controller channels, will run through those 4, no problem. So as long as you can take your voltmeter out and measure which wires go where, and make sure that you're getting ground and 5 volt through the proper wires that are going from the flight controller to the speed controller, you should be good to go. Hopefully that avoids some confusion, because I know sometimes when you get a cable and then you see this one and you're like, oh well, I can just I'll be smart and I'll clever and I'll pop these out and I'll switch them over, and then what you're actually doing is piping in 5 volts and ground to a speed controller channel, and you might burn it out. So just be careful before you get clever and rearrange the pins on these cables, because they might work fine just by leaving them the way they are, as long as you understand which one is ground and then working yourself from ground, 5 volts, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 signals. So yeah, in this case, I can use this cable with this speed controller, and I can plug this in and it will work fine. If I use this one, it would still work fine, but now I'm dealing with my motor signals being switched. I think it goes like, what was that, 4? No. Yeah, so it'd be 3, 4, 1, 2, or something like that. So I'd have to re-switch these, but it doesn't matter. So hopefully that's helpful. It helps you avoid some confusion or making some mistakes when getting some cables, because you're buying a flight controller, you're buying a speed controller, and they usually both come with cables, and you just want to make sure that you use the right cable, or you make sure that you don't try to be too smart and mix up the cables to get the polarities, which you think is right, and burn something up. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully y'all learned something, and I will see you next time.